You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. Once again, we are here today. And today, just like any other time, we have another story for y'all. We have a special guest. Today, we have a true honor talking to Julie Barth. She is an author of a book that we're going to be discussing today, Notes from a BlackBerry. And you can go to her website, juliebarthauthor.net. If you're watching this online, we'll have the information on the bottom of your screen. But if you listen on radio, we'll have it in our show notes. First and foremost, Julie, just off the cuff, you have a powerful story, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of personal conflicts, but resilience is the best thing I can think of as far as a word for you. When you think about what you had to do to prepare yourself to write this book, kind of shed some light of some of the things that you had to do as a mother and just some of the things that you had to discover along the way before you, I don't know how anybody can be prepared for the battles that you have to face.
Sure. So the book, actually, I didn't prepare to write it. The reason it's called Notes from a BlackBerry is because my husband was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer when we had 4 very small children, one who had special needs and had a trach and all of these medical conditions. So I would take him down to chemo on Tuesdays, and while he would, be too sick to talk, really, I started writing my daughter's struggles on my BlackBerry just to occupy my time. And then it quickly flowed into his story. So the reason that I wrote it really was because I wanted to, talk about one of my children who I never thought would get to know their father. I wanted them to know of its courage, and I think for myself, I also wanted to unpack everything that Tatum had been through. So it sat on my laptop for about 15 years. And I went through a different struggle in my life and came out the other end of it. And I decided I had promised Colin in his final days that I was going to make sure that people knew of his courage and his strength. And after reading it, I decided that he deserved to be memorialized and for people to see, and Tatum too, everything that they went through. So that's why I went ahead and released Notes from a BlackBerry with 2 more books that are coming that go into the second part of the story. But it's the beginning story of us, and we grew up together in our childhoods and stuff like that, leading into it ends when he passes away in 2009.
When you look at the medical crisis that you had to go through as a family, what anchored you in those troubled seasons? And as far as being able to share that part of the story with your readers, how did that play out for you to prepare yourself to write?
I think that, when you're in the medical world and something happens to a loved one, and I know that it's part of, people think they're preparing you for things, but you get a whole lot of information right out the gate, and then where do we head? We had to Google, or, we research, and it's like, I just remember refusing to accept everything that people were saying to me. It wasn't that I was in denial. It wasn't that I didn't think bad things could happen. But I just remember thinking, okay, well, there's going to be a whole lot of things that I cannot control about this situation. I can't change Tatum's genetics. I can't cure pancreatic cancer. But as long as Tatum was with us, I was going to make her life as the best it could be and do everything that I could to control what I could control. And kind of the same with Colin is that you can choose to kind of fold into all the bad news and what's coming ahead, or you can take one day at a time. And that's, kind of how I managed it is okay, well, I can't look at the big picture right now because it will be so overwhelming. And I have to just take every day, see the goodness in it, and fix or control what I can, and whatever I can't, you got to let that energy be focused elsewhere, because otherwise, it's just, you can get really stuck in inactivity and anger and frustration and all those other emotions if you can't find a way to make each day, find a positive in it.
When you look at some of the everyday realities of what parents have to go through with special needs children, what was some of the things that you believe that most people might not see when it comes to the everyday routine of addressing that need?
Yeah, when you have a special needs child, you see people and your heart goes out to them because you're like, you see them running around at an appointment or when they're out in public. But, unless you have a special needs child, you really don't understand how consuming it can be. And necessarily, if it's not a doctor's appointment, it's a specialist or an occupational therapist or a physical therapist. And it really does just become your number one priority. And in some instances, like every day is a struggle, just try and get them to the end of the day. But as a parent, you're trying so hard to make everything okay for everyone else around you. There's very little time for you. And even when you take the time, you tend to feel bad, like you don't deserve it. So it really is just, and again, you're getting all of the worst case scenarios and you're presented with these options that you're making for your child that you had hoped you'd never have to make. And there's a bit of guilt in that because as special needs parents, we like to say and focus on the positive of, oh my gosh, Tatum's still here. But there is that part of you that feels a little bit guilty, some days just wishing that you didn't have to deal with all that stuff and feeling burdened by it. And then you look at your child and you think, how can I be, how am I feeling this way? It's not even about me. And there's a degree of guilt in feeling bad or, wishing that your child was normal because you don't want to say that out loud. It's, it feels bad to say something like that, but it's okay to, when, that phrase people always say is like, oh, it could be so much worse. And I tend to sometimes say, yeah, but it could be better. And it's okay to acknowledge that it could be better. That doesn't make you a bad person to sometimes just say, I've had enough. This is really more than I can handle and I need some help here. And, it's hard to ask for help for many parents.
Once again, listen to Refocus Radio, watching us online, talking to our guest today, Julie Barth. You can go get a copy of her book. It's available right now anywhere you get a book, Amazon, easy place to go to. Notes from the BlackBerry. My next question is, want to kind of backtrack a little bit and address that when you see how you had to early on become a caregiver. What was some of the lessons learned as far as how you understood love, boundaries, and what it meant to protect yourself?
I think it took me probably getting to the other side to, look back and see. And maybe that's why I speak out, is because when you're caught in the middle of it, it's really easy. I think the tendency is to kind of like pull back and isolate and figure like, I got to figure my stuff out and kind of push people away because you feel like they don't want to hear it. They've had enough of it. And then the more they pull away, the more you pull away. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation where your phone hasn't rang, and you haven't gone out and you haven't done anything. And then where do you go from there? It's almost like seeing somebody in a grocery store that you haven't seen in 10 years. Where do you even start that conversation? So you just leave it. And so I think, the totality of what I've been through, and people have said this to me that I didn't even recognize, was, they say to me, wow, those were really lonely years for you, because I was so immersed in my own thoughts and taking care of everyone else. And I think that it's important to remind yourself that you are human, and as a mother, as a spouse, yes, your number one priority is to help, but you can't sacrifice your own, yourself in that process. And it's not selfish to take time for yourself. It's not selfish to feel bad some days, and it's not selfish to ask for, like I said, I think that asking for help is so critical because, you always feel like you don't want to burden people, but it makes people feel good to help, and you help everybody else. So, it's almost like you're doing somebody a favor when you let them help, because they do. They might stop asking if you don't take them up on it, but it doesn't still mean that they're not there and that they don't want to still help you. So I think that's a really good lesson to learn, is like, let people in to your world, let them help, and keep reaching out to the people around you instead of feeling like they've left or they're done with your drama or whatever, you might tend to feel.
When you see how emotional and financial hardship can come with this, what were some of the challenges that you had to face head on, and how did you keep yourself motivated to keep pressing forward? I started a charity for this very reason, and it's specifically targeted toward women. And it's not, everybody that gets into these crises is a horrible situation because you almost have to lose everything in order to get assistance. And as a mother, you've devoted your life to caregiving children, so you might not be in the work world. And I found myself in a situation where not only, I couldn't work because of Tatum, because I was the primary caregiver, but then even when she got better, I had other children. So when Colin got sick, he was a trader at the Board of Trade. That was it. The day he stopped working, and he was around for 16 months. And we were very, very blessed to have an entire community around us that donated and fundraised and, really just, did everything possible to help us. And I cannot be grateful enough. I also know that if, it was happening to other people at the time, and if we didn't have that support, I don't know where we would be today. So, as a single mom, you try and enter the workforce, and everyone's like, well, what have you been doing for the past 10 years? And as if you've been sitting in a bubble and you haven't learned all of these skills. So I think it is important as a woman to protect yourself, to recognize that it is important for you to save for yourself, to make sure that you're secure. I mean, I hope everyone has a great romance and that is like that their love blooms. But, I even had the greatest love. Nothing's guaranteed. So being creative, remembering that you are still, in the workforce and a part of the world, and that at some point, if you do have to fall back on something, that you have something to fall back on. We tell sports athletes this, right? We say like, well, what if you, but we don't tell moms that. And it's kind of the same situation, like we tell them, your career might end at any point, and then what are you going to do? We don't tell young moms that. We don't tell older moms that. We don't say, at some point you might have to shoulder all of this and be prepared. And you're not prepared because you've been taking care of everyone else. If you could sit with your younger self, what would you want to say to her when it comes to emotionally and in the mental health space as encouragement? Because for someone to have to go through this head on, you don't have the luxury of having a personal coach right there and then to help you understand what's going on.
Yeah, I think that it's really important, first of all, to stop worrying about what other people think. It was very hard for me when I had Tatum. People would stare at her. They still do. They stare at her and they gawk at her. And, she never cared, but it hurt me, and I was always trying to make her the best person she could be. And when I just finally decided it didn't matter what other people thought, like, I love her. She's an amazing person who cares. And I think that degree of always caring what other people think or how you look, and it really does shape our decisions. It shapes the way we feel about ourselves. And I wish I could say to the younger me, if you can look in the mirror and you're good with yourself, that you're a good person, that your decisions were made out of the best intentions, and sometimes they didn't work out the way you wanted them to, but you worked on what information you had in front of you, and stop beating yourself up about it so much, because you did, like I said, you did the best thing that you knew and your intentions were good. And I think that, when you get trampled over as many times or have these challenges over and over again, you start to really, you can always see the mistakes you made. I mean, I bet if you sat anybody down right now, and you said, hey, what didn't you get to today? What mistake did you make? I bet you'd have a list, to hear. But if you said, hey, what did you do positive today? I think people would really have to try harder and really search to find the positive in what they did. So those would be the two things, I guess, is just like recognize how far you've come and how much you've done, and stop worrying about what everybody else thinks, or, you know, how they're looking at you, or whether they think you're a good person or doing the right thing. Because it doesn't, in the end, it doesn't matter as long as you know you are.
And with your outreach, your nonprofit, you mentioned moments ago, earlier in the interview, when you are helping support women-led households who are facing a crisis, one can only imagine the strength that they had to, you know, endure and uphold. Because when you're facing the crisis, like we said moments ago, it's not like you have a plan that just drops in your lap. It's kind of like you have to adapt in the moment and make best use of what you have with resources. With your nonprofit, for a woman out there who might feel like they're just stuck in the crisis right now, what's some first steps that they can start taking to reclaim their peace and eventually their power?
Well, you know, if you go to my website, we do offer assistance for women. We're very young in our charities. We're trying to figure out exactly where we stand. But I think sometimes just recognizing that you need help is the first step. And when you hit these crises, you know, you come along and you think that you would know what you need, but when you're hit with something and everything's gone in an instant, you don't even know what you need. You know, you can't possibly. I had somebody right after Colin died, probably a week after Colin died, I had a credit card company call me and say, hey, rip that credit card up. That one no longer, that doesn't, you know, it's not your credit card. It was your husband's. And just stuff like that, like just getting the advice from somebody who has been there, who knows what you're going to need, who can point you in the right direction. You know, just be open and asking for help, finding the right organizations. If you go to our organization, we take it on a case-by-case basis. It's almost like, you know, I've been 5 different Julies. I've been the special needs mom. I've been the widow. I've been the terminally ill caregiver. I've been the emotionally abused spouse. You know, I try and take each one of these cases on an individual basis and break it down. What do you need? Where can we get those services? And how can we help support you in the interim to getting all of those? And I think that's the hardest part, is just sitting down and saying, I don't even know where to start, because it's so overwhelming and the gravity of it can just really make you feel stuck. When you turn your story into words, what you had to experience, what do you hope readers will be able to gain insight from your perspective? Because, like I said, when all this pain comes your way, it's a powerful moment when you're able to see the other side. Yeah, I was just talking to someone about this, because it's not a light book. I mean, it's a love story. It comes with a lot of challenges, and I will give the warning that there are some triggers in there too. It almost touches on every part of, you know, the growing up experiences and the traumas that we all have. And I think that everyone can probably relate to many parts of the story in different ways. So my hope is that in reading it, I do think that it's very powerful to know that you are not alone. And if you can read my book, you know, people say to me all the time, like, you should forgive yourself. You should. And I have forgiven myself, but it makes me feel good that somebody else can recognize that when you're in these situations that you're so hard on yourself. And if somebody else is reading this and can say to themselves, gosh, she's being too hard on herself, then hopefully they'll look in the mirror and say, hey, wait a second, maybe I'm being too hard on myself. Like, I get this. I understand why she feels this way, and she's not alone, and I'm not alone, because this is the way that humans feel. This is you never know how you're going to react to something until you're in it. And it's just nice to know that there are other people out there that, you know, have been there, they've done that, and they've lived through it. And I came out the other end of it. Not exactly how I wanted, but it's made me who I am now. And I wouldn't trade a minute of it, as painful as it was. And for you, you're a mother of 6 children.
that's like super mom, that's superwoman, because one would think, how in the world do you find time to stay afloat? Because that's a lot of people to look over.
Yeah. Yeah. Some people would probably say I'm crazy, but, I have to say that I don't think I would have made it through without them. I think it's been a very, symbiotic relationship where I know I have to get up in the morning and my job is to make sure that they're okay. And as much as I say that, my children I am so very blessed. They are all very kind to me. They very much help me. When they see me struggle, they all chip in, and it's more like we're just a very tight knit group. So yeah, I haven't raised them all on my own. Sometimes they've raised themselves. Other times the older ones have raised the younger ones. It's just a very beautiful relationship when you know that your children are also your friends at times and you need them. They're your pick me up. They're the people that you keep going for. And I hope that, I work on myself a lot because I see a lot of the things that I do that might not have been productive throughout my life. And I'm hoping to be a role model by changing some of these traits that served me well at one point, but maybe not at others. And I think that's the thing about kids is, they reflect you. And when you recognize that, you almost become the best version of yourself. If not for you, then hopefully for them. So like I said, people say that they don't know how I do it, and I don't know how I would have done it without them.
Once again, listen to Refocus Radio and watching us online, talking to our guest today, Julie Barth. You go to her website, juliebarthauthor.net, talking about her book that you can get on Amazon. It's Notes from a BlackBerry. When you take the time to reflect on how far you came. We mentioned earlier about why it's important to reach out for help and speak up. If you knew someone, a woman out there watching and listening, and they feel ashamed to speak up, or they feel nervous, how people might react to knowing details of what they're going through, what would you say to her to encourage her to say, you know what, despite what you might feel or think, is more important to be active and reach out for help?
And I think the other part is the second situation where, I was emotionally abused, I think is where my real passion lays, where I feel like I can, speak to it. I just think, my very worst day today is 10 times better than my very best day for an entire decade. I think it gets very easy to feel stuck in something, and you are so married to the dream of what you want your life to be that you have a hard time actually looking around and seeing what it is. And I think there's an element of, I don't want to give up on this. Nobody wants to give up. No one wants to feel like a failure. And I can just say that when you get on the other side of it, you can see it so much more clearly than when you're in it. And if your brain is telling you that something's not right, stop ignoring it. I think stop making excuses for it, and, get on the other side of it. And it's horrible. It's so hard to get out of these situations, but staying stuck in it and losing the time, the energy, really just letting it rob your joy, is so much worse than getting beyond it. And, that's for caregiving as well as, obviously you can't do anything in a caregiving situation, but for the person that's also out there stuck in a situation where they're caring for somebody who's terminally ill or a special needs child, there does come a point where you're either, nothing lasts forever and it has to resolve one way or another. And if you can just try and, find the goodness in whatever you're looking at right now and recognizing that it does suck. Like, I'm not saying it's not horrible, and I can't imagine what you're going through because everyone experiences loss and grief and all these emotions differently. But I can tell you that when you get on the other side of it, things are so much better. You'll wish that you had changed things long before you actually did.
I said a word early in the show, resilience, because life will throw everything at you and doesn't give you a preview. It just kind of knocks on your door and say, bam, here goes your issue to deal for today. Resilience is something that I feel we don't truly appreciate until we get to that other side. And it's like, okay, this is what I learned. How do you remind yourself that you made it through those small battles in the past, and to keep you motivated when you face today's challenges?
I think that, the younger me used to feel angry. Sometimes I would be like, why am I stuck in this situation again? Well, why do I? The older me is able to say, this is why. And when you find the beauty in it, why did I have to, have Tatum be sick and go through, she ended up getting cancer later on in life. And I used to say, why is she doing this? But that's why I got her art out there. That's why I felt, the need to publish this book, because all of these struggles that we go through in life are meant to teach us a lesson. Sometimes we don't want to learn that lesson, and sometimes we'll resist against it for as long as we can. But I do believe that there's beauty in getting over it, getting past it. And then it's almost like this light bulb goes off and you're like, that is why I'm here. That is what I'm meant to learn. And this is what I'm meant to do with it. And if you can take all of that and you can turn it into a purpose or a passion and know that you're taking, all of these hardships and the grief of it and the loss, and you're turning it into something to help other people or to make it, meaningful. Because I think, I've always felt like there's a meaning in everything that we do. And I refuse to believe that everything in this world is meaningless and random. I don't believe that. And I think that when you turn it into a mission or a passion, then it becomes meaningful, and you can, do something that kind of heals your soul in all of it, because it makes all of those pieces that you feel are kind of broken come together, and it gives you a purpose to move forward.
Last thing I'll say before we wrap up is mothers are very powerful, and they are so important to families. My last request for you will be, what would you say to mothers around the world? Just a spark of, encouragement as they continue their motherhood.
I think mothering is one of the hardest jobs in the entire world. I said it before that, if you try to get a job, they say, well, what have you been doing? CEOs, I don't know that many of them can run a household the way that some moms do. And I just think that, we're taught to care for everyone else. We're taught, be the breadwinner, be the this, be the that. And we take everything very, very personally. And if you're a mom and your kids are, the fact that you get them to the end of the day and they're still at home is a pretty big accomplishment. Nobody gives you instructions. We don't go to school to do this. And we pretty much devote everything that we have to raise children and care for them and make them the best that they can be. So, it's hard for me to even say it, but pat yourself on the back, because everything that you've done with the best of intentions. Again, maybe things don't work out the way you want, or your child, isn't exactly behaving the way that you want them to, but that's all in the learning process. And give yourself the same grace that you give to others around you, because we're always hardest on ourselves.
Once again, you're listening to Refocus Radio and watching us online, talking to our guest today, Julie Barth. Go get her book, Notes from a BlackBerry. You can go to her website, juliebarthauthor.net. Like always, like we say to all our guests, I want to say to you, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed our conversation.